city went dark just after 10 o'clock. No warning, no countdown. Just a single flicker across every window, and then nothing. Traffic lights died mid-change. Elevators froze between floors. And somewhere above all of it, on the rooftop of an old newspaper building, a red light stayed on. WNDR radio, the station that never went quiet no matter what happened below it. Inside the studio, Nora Quinn sat in front of her microphone, watching the backup generator hum to life through the static on her headphones. She was 30 years old. She had spent most of her adult life talking to people who couldn't sleep. Tonight, she had an entire blackout to keep company. "If you can hear my voice," she said into the mic, "then somewhere out there the lights are still on. Right here, in this room, and I'm not going anywhere." The calls started almost immediately. A man trapped in a stalled elevator, trying to keep his breathing steady. A nurse asking for directions to the hospital because her phone's GPS had failed. An old woman who just wanted to hear a song she used to dance to with her husband. Nora took every call the same way. Calm, unhurried, like nothing in the world was more important than the voice on the other end of the line. It was a skill she'd built over years, not a gift she was born with. She couldn't tell you a caller's name from a single syllable, but she could tell you how they breathed before a lie, how they hesitated before a truth, how a person's rhythm changed the moment fear crept into a sentence they thought they'd controlled. Tonight, that skill was just a habit, a way to keep strangers calm in the dark. She had no idea that somewhere in that darkness, someone was dialing her number for a very different reason, and that, by morning, the same instinct she used to soothe a lonely city would be the only thing standing between a dead woman's truth and a lie that had survived 4 years of silence. The call came in at 11:40. The voice was a woman's, low, steady, cutting through the static like she had rehearsed every word 100 times. "Don't hang up," the woman said. "No matter who walks through your door tonight, don't hang up." Nora frowned but kept her voice even. "You have my attention. What's this about?" There was a pause, a breath. And then the woman said a sentence that meant nothing to Nora at all. "The black crow never lands before the third bell." Nora almost laughed. "I'm sorry, is that a song request?" "Ask Adrian Crowe," the woman said. Why he forgot it. The line went dead. Nora sat there for a moment, staring at the blinking console light where the call had been. She didn't know the name Adrian Crowe meant anything more than a name. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. 10 minutes later, the service stairwell door slammed open. Boots on concrete, fast, deliberate. Nora barely had time to turn in her chair before a man stepped into the red light of the studio, flanked by 2 others, a pistol raised and pointed directly at her chest. He was tall, dressed like money that didn't need to prove itself, and his eyes had the kind of stillness that came from years of never being questioned. Miles, the station's old sound engineer, started to move from the control room, but Nora lifted one hand, just slightly. "Stay there. Who gave you that sentence?" the man demanded. "I don't even know what it means," Nora said. "Don't lie to me. I'm not in the habit of lying on a live broadcast," she said. "Ask anyone who's called in tonight." The man stepped closer, gun still raised. "You have 1 minute to tell me who gave you that sentence before this station loses more than its signal." Nora didn't flinch. She looked past the barrel of the gun and straight at him, the way she looked at every caller who thought silence would scare her into talking first. "I did not know the code," she said, "but your caller knew you would come for me." The man's jaw tightened. For the first time since he'd walked in, he looked less like a threat and more like a man who had just realized he was standing in the wrong story. His name was Adrian Crowe, and he ran the most feared family in the city. Men like him didn't walk into radio stations. They sent someone else to do it, someone whose name could be denied later if things went wrong. The fact that he'd come himself, gun in hand, through a blackout in a service stairwell, told Nora something Adrian hadn't meant to reveal. Whatever that sentence meant to him, it wasn't business. It was personal enough to override every rule that usually kept a man like him 3 steps removed from the mess. Nora filed that away too. Not just what he said, what he chose to risk in order to say it. Adrian didn't lower the gun right away, but he didn't ask his men to touch her either. "That voice," he said. "It sounded like my wife." "Your wife," Nora repeated carefully. "She's dead. 4 years. Nora studied him for a moment, the way his hand tightened slightly around the grip, the way his voice dropped a register on the word dead, like it still cost him something to say it out loud. "Tell me how she used to talk," Nora said. Not what she said, how she said it. Adrian looked at her like she'd asked something absurd. You're asking me to describe my dead wife's voice to a radio host holding a room hostage. I'm asking you to help me find out who's lying to you, Nora said. That includes me, if you think I am. He didn't answer at first. Then, slowly he started talking, the pace of her sentences, the way she said his name, the way fear made her breathe. Nora listened to all of it, filing away every detail the way she'd learned to over a decade of live radio. Then she said it plainly. A similar voice is not the same speaker. She pointed out what she'd already caught in the first call. The woman on the phone had never once said his name. She'd said, "your wife," instead of using her own. She took a breath before every word that started with a hard consonant, a habit Adrian's description of Lydia didn't match at all. Whoever called, Nora said, "Sarah's blood with her." But she isn't her. For the first time, Adrian lowered the gun an inch. Before he could ask another question, his phone buzzed, a private, secured line. He answered, and Nora watched his face shift as he listened. It was his family's lawyer, Victor Halden, calling to warn him that the code could only have come from Lydia's private files. He urged Adrian to leave the station immediately, confiscate the recordings, and let the firm's investigators handle it quietly. Victor sounded reasonable, careful, like a man trying to prevent a disaster before it started. Nora watched Adrian's grip on the phone loosen, watched him start to agree. Then she asked one question. "Why does your lawyer know a phrase that was never in any official file?" Adrian paused. Victor, on the other end, said Adrian must have mentioned it himself once, after Lydia's death. Adrian didn't remember ever saying it. It was a small thing, a single loose thread. But it was the first one. The second call came almost an hour later from a different line, a payphone somewhere across the blacked-out city. "My name is Celine Vale," the woman said. "Lydia was my sister, my twin sister." Adrian's face went white. "That's not possible. I would have known." "That's exactly why I'm still alive," Celine said. "Our family split us up when we were children. 2 targets are worse than 1, especially when your father launders money for people who don't forgive debts." Adrian didn't believe her. Not yet. Nora did what she always did with a caller she couldn't verify. She asked questions no one could script in advance. "What did Lydia call the first rain of spring?" Celine hesitated, then answered, not with the answer Adrian expected, but with something closer, something real enough that Nora noted the difference between rehearsed and remembered. "When she was angry," Nora asked. "Did she talk faster or slower?" "Slower," Celine said. "She'd go quiet first. Then everything came out too controlled, like she was reading it off a card." Celine didn't know some of the private details only a husband would know. But she knew childhood memories Adrian had never heard in his life. Nora reached her conclusion carefully. Celine wasn't pretending to be Lydia. She was trying to prove she came from the same place, without stepping into a name that wasn't hers. Celine explained the code, finally. "The black crow never lands before the 3rd bell," she said. Wasn't romantic. It was a warning. Don't trust the first report. Wait for a 3rd confirmation from someone outside the family. Adrian went very still. For 4 years, he had done the opposite of everything that sentence meant. When Lydia died, Victor had brought him a report of betrayal. A witness had confirmed it. Bank records showed money moving to the wrong hands. Adrian had never waited for a 3rd source. He had reacted to the first one and let grief harden into something easier to carry, rage. Not long after, Adrian turned his suspicion toward Miles. The first call had been logged in the station's own system, and only Miles and Nora had access to it. A signal trace suggested the call originated somewhere near the building itself. Adrian accused Miles of working with Celine. Nora didn't defend him out of loyalty. She checked the evidence, the maintenance logs, the background noise on the recording, the rhythm of a fan running in the background that matched a relay station blocks away, not the building they were standing in. The data cleared Miles. Nora trusted facts over feelings, even when the feelings were her own. Then Nora remembered something from years earlier, a call from a woman using a false name, asking a strange question live on air. "What do you do when every private line belongs to someone else?" Miles dug through the archive and found the old reel. The voice on it was Lydia's. Adrian recognized it instantly. His breath caught, and for a moment the room went silent except for the hiss of old tape. In the recording, Lydia hadn't accused anyone. She had simply asked whether a live broadcast could ever truly disappear once it aired. Nora, years younger, had told her that a recording could vanish, but a memory heard by an audience never could. The tape proved 3 things at once. Lydia had trusted this station as an escape route long before anyone suspected betrayal. She had known her private lines were being watched. And Celine had been telling the truth the entire time. Adrian sat with that silence for a long moment after the tape stopped. He had spent 4 years hating a woman for something the evidence had never actually proven, only implied, only arranged. Nora didn't touch him. She simply lowered the volume and said, quietly, "Tell me when to continue." It wasn't sympathy, it was something else. The first time in years someone had given Adrian a choice instead of managing him. "Play it," he finally said. For the first time since he'd walked into that studio with a gun raised, Adrian trusted her with a piece of his wife's memory. The third call came just before 1 in the morning. The voice matched Celine almost perfectly. Too perfectly. The woman on the line knew the code. She knew Lydia's childhood nickname. She knew where a ring had been hidden. She even repeated something Adrian had said, privately, at his wife's funeral. She begged Adrian to come alone to an address across the city, insisting Celine was in danger and running out of time. Adrian moved toward the door. Nora almost let him. But before she opened the private line, she asked one more question, the kind she'd learned to ask when something felt too smooth. "What did you call him, back when Lydia was alive?" "Adrian," the voice answered. Nora froze. The real Celine never used his first name. She had never met him. She kept her distance out of respect for a sister she'd never gotten the chance to properly know, always calling him Mr. Crowe instead. Nora listened closer this time. A breath that repeated exactly every 12 seconds. An S sound clipped in precisely the same place every time. Static that never changed even when the voice grew louder. It was a splice. A manufactured voice, built from old recordings and fed through a live line by someone who had studied every call before it. Nora cut the connection immediately. It was already too late. Whoever built that fake voice had used the call to trace the station's backup channel. Somewhere below them, the generator that kept WNDR alive in the blackout began to flicker. Nora didn't try to hide her mistake. "I heard what I expected to hear," she admitted. Adrian didn't blame her. He'd made the same mistake for 4 years, just with higher stakes. "Then we stopped reacting to the first voice," he said. It was the code finally doing what it was meant to do. Miles ran a check on Adrian's phone and found something worse than either of them expected. Every call Adrian made from his private line was silently mirrored to a server owned by Victor Halden's law firm, a security measure Adrian had signed off on years earlier without reading the fine print of what it actually did. That system had blocked every attempt Celine made to reach him, every email, every letter. Every quiet word passed through a third party. It had also, somehow, provided the fake caller with samples of Lydia's real voice. Adrian remembered signing that authorization. Victor had brought it to him days after the funeral, calling it a way to stabilize the family during a fragile time. He had trusted the man managing his grief more than he trusted his own instincts. Adrian made a decision. He called Victor back on the same monitored line and lied through every word of it. He said Nora had confessed to fabricating the calls. He said Celine didn't exist. He said he planned to arrest Nora the moment he had the recordings in hand, and that the station would go dark within 20 minutes. Victor believed every word, because it sounded exactly like the Adrian he had spent years shaping, a man who reacted first and asked questions never. While Victor prepared to send men to secure the evidence, Adrian was doing the opposite of what he claimed. He moved his most loyal men to guard the rooftop antenna. He cut off the security team Victor had personally assigned. He declared quietly that no weapon would ever be fired inside that studio. And he used Miles's old analog line, a channel outside the monitored network entirely, to stay in contact with the outside world. For the first time since Lydia's death, Adrian wasn't reacting to the first signal. He was waiting for the third bell. Celine called one last time, using a short burst transmission, careful not to say an address out loud. In the background, Nora picked up 3 metallic chimes, the rattle of an old train passing, and the uneven whir of a transmitter spinning at an inconsistent rhythm. Adrian recognized it immediately, an abandoned chapel near the Eastern Power Yard, a place with an old analog relay station tucked inside it. Lydia had hidden a secondary copy of her evidence there before she died. Adrian didn't leave the station himself. He sent someone outside his family's compromised phone network to retrieve it. Proof that he had finally learned not to run toward the first signal that called his name. While they waited, Adrian said something he hadn't said out loud to anyone. He admitted that he had never reopened Lydia's file, not once in 4 years, because anger was easier to live inside than grief. If she had betrayed him, her death made a kind of terrible sense. If she had died trying to protect him instead, Then he had to face the fact that he never really understood the person closest to him. Believing the worst about the dead is easier, Nora said. They can't correct you. Adrian asked why she was still standing there, in a station about to be raided by his own family's lawyer. Because someone chose this microphone, Nora said, after every private door failed. For the first time, Adrian looked at her not as the woman who'd triggered a crisis, but as someone standing guard over the only place his wife's truth had managed to survive. Victor arrived not long after, holding a legal order. He wanted the broadcast stopped, the recordings seized. Nora detained for obstruction. All of the station's equipment transferred to the family's legal team for safekeeping. He still sounded reasonable. He always did. He warned that airing an unverified confession could start a war, tear the family apart, and turn Lydia's memory into a public scandal. He warned that Celine could be killed the moment her name became public. Nora looked at him steadily. Staying silent, she said, is exactly what protected the person responsible for 4 years. The recording finally arrived, not a digital file, but a small analog reel. Lydia had used tape on purpose, knowing electronic files could be intercepted and erased without a trace. Miles worked quickly to restore the damaged sections. What came through was unmistakable. Victor Halden's voice, discussing a car explosion with another man, confirming that Lydia had gotten her hands on files she wasn't supposed to have, ordering fabricated evidence of betrayal, adjusting the timeline in the death report. And then, the line that made the room go cold. Adrian will believe the betrayal, Victor's voice said, because it's easier than admitting his own house has been compromised. Victor, standing in the studio, insisted the tape could have been edited. Nora agreed. A single recording wasn't enough on its own, so they built the rest of the chain, piece by piece, in front of everyone listening. The chimes on the tape matched Victor's old office. The tape itself showed no splice marks at the critical lines, according to Miles's analysis. Phone logs placed Victor's calls to the man responsible for the explosion, both before and after Lydia's death. Financial transfers lined up exactly with the day the falsified betrayal report was created. The law firm's servers held the very voice samples used to build the fake caller earlier that night. And Celine, a woman Victor had insisted didn't exist, knew the exact location of a hidden analog relay only Lydia could have told her about. Victor had no explanation for that last one, not one that held. He tried anyway. He said the chimes were common in older buildings across the district. He said tape could be doctored by anyone with patience and the right equipment. He said phone logs proved nothing except that men in his position received calls from all kinds of people, all the time, for all kinds of reasons. Each explanation was smaller than the one before it. Nora let him talk. She had learned long ago that a guilty man rarely stops at one excuse. He builds a second, then a third, and by the third, the story starts to disagree with itself. Victor's third explanation didn't match his first. Adrian caught it before Nora even had to point it out. "You just told me the chimes were common," Adrian said quietly. "Now you're telling me the tape is fake. Which is it, Victor? Because it can't be both." Victor said nothing. For a man who had spent his career making sure no one ever caught him contradicting himself, the silence was its own confession. That's when Victor gave the signal. The backup generator was sabotaged. The studio went dark except for a single flash of red before the emergency light died completely. The main transmitter shut down entirely. Victor announced, almost calmly, that the broadcast was over. But Miles wasn't finished. The rooftop's secondary antenna still had emergency battery power, enough for a manual signal, if someone could reach it and rewire the line by hand. Outside the studio, Adrian's men and Victor's men faced off in the hallway, weapons half raised. Adrian didn't reach for the microphone. He reached for the door instead, standing between it and everyone in the hallway. "No one fires toward the studio," he said. "Not mine. Not his." Victor sneered, calling Adrian a fool for protecting the woman who had just destroyed his dead wife's reputation. Adrian looked at him and said, "No. I'm protecting the first place her truth survived." It was the moment everything shifted. The station stopped being Crowe property. It became something neither family could touch, a place where no one had the right to cut off someone else's voice. Miles rerouted the line by hand, connecting the microphone to the rooftop antenna. The signal was weak, but it reached across the blacked-out city all the same. Nora didn't play the confession immediately. She told her listeners plainly what was about to happen. That a confession was coming. That part of the evidence had already been verified. That part of it was still being confirmed. And that the difference between the two mattered. It was the lesson she'd carried since the mistake that had once cost an innocent person their job and their reputation. A live microphone was never proof by itself. It was a door, and the people on the other side of it deserved to know exactly who had opened it and why. Then she played the tape. Victor's voice spread across a city with no power, no traffic lights, and very few working phones, but thousands of people still listening in the dark. There was no hiding it in a file this time. No burying it in paperwork no one had a reason to reopen. Victor tried to leave through the rooftop stairwell. Adrian stopped him. Victor spat that Lydia had died because Adrian was never sharp enough to run his own family without someone managing the information for him. For a moment, Adrian had every reason and every opportunity to end it right there, but the microphone downstairs was still live. If he killed Victor now, the wider network behind him would never be exposed. It would look like nothing more than another quiet mafia execution, and Lydia's truth would be buried under violence all over again. Adrian lowered his weapon. "You used my grief to make me predictable," he said. "You don't get to use my anger the same way." Victor was taken alive along with every server and file his firm had used to build a 4-year lie. After the arrest, Adrian walked back into the studio. Nora was still on air. He didn't ask her to cut the feed. Instead, he spoke directly into the microphone he had once used to threaten her. "I came here believing the person carrying the message had created it," he said. He admitted everything, Liv, to everyone who had heard him threaten her hours earlier. That he had pointed a gun at an innocent woman. That he had assumed the worst without checking a single fact. That he had repeated, almost exactly, the mistake Lydia had once tried to warn him against. Nora didn't offer easy forgiveness. "Then remember the third bell next time," she said. In the days that followed, Lydia's name was cleared entirely. The falsified transfers were exposed as fabricated evidence. The Crowe family publicly acknowledged that Lydia had never betrayed Adrian. She had been gathering proof against Victor, and her death had been an assassination made to look like something else entirely. Adrian didn't turn her into a saint. He acknowledged that she had hidden her plan from him, that she had made a decision about what he was allowed to know on his behalf without asking him. It wasn't betrayal. It was protection carried out the wrong way, and Victor had turned that mistake into a weapon. Adrian met Celine privately, somewhere neutral, away from any family's influence. He didn't call her Lydia. He didn't ask her to take her sister's place or to join a family she'd spent her whole life being hidden from. He simply thanked her for continuing to call long after every private door had been closed to her. Celine handed over the original recording and agreed to testify on the condition that her identity stayed protected from the public entirely. Adrian signed an agreement with the other families in the city. No one would seize WNDR. No one would force the station to reveal a caller's identity without an independent order. No weapons would be brought into the studio. No one would cut its signal to bury a story involving their own name. The station built a dedicated analog line, a channel meant for anyone whose usual ways of speaking the truth had already been compromised. Nora never became Adrian's employee. She kept full control over her own show. Weeks later, close to midnight, Adrian returned to the station. No bodyguards, no weapon, no crisis waiting outside the door. Nora was closing out her broadcast when she noticed a name lighting up on her console. Anonymous Crowe. She pressed the button. "You're on the air." Adrian's voice came through from the waiting room down the hall. "I have a question for the host." "Go ahead," Nora said. "Does she ever have dinner with people who aren't threatening her station?" "Rarely," Nora said. Her standards improved. The on-air light clicked to commercial, and Adrian stepped into the studio without touching the microphone. He asked if the invitation could be repeated off the air. "That depends," Nora said. "Is it a request?" "Yes," he answered, and after a pause, "And I can wait for the third bell." Nora smiled, reached over, and switched off the on-air sign. Adrian stepped closer, but stopped just short of her. It was Nora who reached for his tie and pulled him down. She closed the distance herself, and he let her. When she finally pulled back, Adrian kept his forehead close to hers, like he wasn't in any hurry to prove he'd learned patience, just in a hurry to prove he remembered it. "Third bell," he murmured. "You waited long enough," Nora said. "I had a good reason," he said. "I was listening to a woman who taught me that the truth is worth waiting for." Another night, much later, the city's lights were back on for good. Inside the WNDR studio, the old red bulb was still the only light anyone used. Nora sat at her microphone. Behind the glass of the control room, Adrian sat quietly, listening to her talk to the people who still couldn't sleep. A new call came through. Nora pressed the button. After midnight, you're live. On the other end, a voice trembled. I don't know who else I can tell. Nora glanced through the glass. Adrian didn't step inside. He didn't give an order. He didn't ask who was calling. He simply closed the control room door, so no one outside could hear a word of it. Nora turned back to her microphone. Then start with what you know. The on-air light stayed on.